Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. Imagine a neighbor so entitled that she thinks she can use your private property as her personal party venue without asking. When I caught my HOA president throwing a massive barbecue on my inherited land at midnight, I had two choices: let her get away with it or teach her a lesson she would never forget. Here is what I did. And the first one starts like this. So I was young when I fell in love with the lifestyle that came with living on a few acres in the woods. My grandfather had told off when his father owned much more land and worked the entire land instead of just the animals that I grew up with. I do remember the last horses that he sold, but I was so young and for the most part it was just a dairy and chicken farm. Before my grandfather passed, it had just been chicken. When I inherited the land, I brought back some cows and reinvigorated the dairy. I did this because I knew how much my grandfather adored his work and how much it hurt him to relinquish the cows and accept the knowledge of his own aging. Even amongst my parents and my two aunts and my various cousins, I was the sole inheritor of his estate. He knew I was the only one who would appreciate the respect that he put into the place. Right when it felt like keeping the farm was too much for his aging body, my grandfather got an offer for a huge parcel of his land for, surprisingly, a pretty decent price. He just had to promise to also join the homeowner association HOA that would manage the housing development being built there. He turned them down and they built the housing development without his portion of the land. Where the neighborhood bordered his property, he put up signs to clearly mark where his property ended. I still remember how adamant he was about not selling any piece of the property. He said, "I already had to see my father's land cut away at over and over when I was younger. I'm not gonna hurt it anymore now that I should be old and wise enough to know better." He always said that I would be allowed to do whatever I wanted with it once I owned the place. But he had picked me because I was the closest to him out of all my cousins, and it was exactly because I was that close to him that I couldn't sell it. The president of the HOA, we will call her Karen, was the one that continuously tried to chip away at my grandfather's will by constantly nagging him with offers to buy the land during the last stages of the construction. And well, she eased up the tiniest bit once the construction was done. The last thing a new community needs is more construction disturbing the peace, but she always had her eyes on it. So much so that the moment my grandfather passed away, she was at the door trying to purchase the land from whoever it was passed to. When she learned it had been left in its entirety to me, she was understandably upset because I had fought her on numerous occasions before this. Now, I might not be a part of the HOA, but I'm neighbors with the people who live in it, and I know that Karen is not even popular within her own HOA. She has such strict regulations in place that one of my neighbors had to choose between leaving his porch light broken or convincing the entire neighborhood to change their porch lights. All because they didn't see the parts to fix his porch light when it got badly damaged. She will send one of her sons to mow your yard if you're so much as a day behind the schedule she sends out. This would otherwise be a nice gesture and a way to keep the neighborhood uniform, except she has charged as much as $100 for a yard in the past. And of course, my neighbors cannot say much because the HOA can and will charge fines for breaches in contract, and for anyone who abuses what power they are given, they cannot help but to grab for more. Even though I was very firm against every approach that she made for my land, she still would show up regularly just to try her hand. I would catch her on my land at various times as well, and I got myself cameras on my animals just in case she was gonna attempt something drastic. Luckily, before she attempted anything that would leave a permanent mark, she decided to grasp desperately for some power over me and throw a temper tantrum. I was not living on the property full-time because I still had a hybrid schedule, which meant I had to spend about half the week in my city apartment so I could be in the office. Karen got a good enough grasp of my schedule, I guess, so she decided to start using my land for HOA events without asking for permission. Any signs of this happening ranged from minor to non-existent at first, but it finally came to my attention all at once. I was woken up by notifications from the cameras on my grandpa's property one night, and when I checked them I didn't see any effects right away, but with the sound on I could hear that something strange was happening. It was the middle of the night and I was supposed to be preparing to be at work in the morning, but some paranoia had me up and in my car within 30 minutes of the notification. If I was wrong, I would just be exhausted at the office for one day, not the end of the world. I arrived on the property and it was immediately apparent that I was not wrong. Karen had thrown a barbecue with an after party for the neighborhood on my own property. It might not have amounted to much, except that she recruited her son to bring in as many young people as he could, and then brought in fireworks and a DJ. By the time I had been woken up and made it to my property, most of my neighbors were not even there anymore, but Karen had brought in the perfect crowd to stay through the night, if no one stopped them. And no one in the neighborhood was about to bring Karen's wrath upon themselves by calling the cops. It took me a while to find Karen, but when I did, I immediately commanded her to bring an end to this party and her harassment in general. I had rehearsed this last bit enough, I remember how it went. I've restrained myself from involving the authorities to bring an end to your harassment, but I won't anymore. Get them off my land. Karen responded by spitting at my feet. You're wasting the land with the way you're keeping it. That had me fuming, but I just responded with a shrug and walked away. Karen looked shocked to see me give up, not as shocked as when the police arrived though. Meanwhile, she was screaming at me that this property is actually part of the homeowner association and that she has the right to host parties here. I was honestly baffled by her audacity to designate my property as some kind of HOA land, even though I never even thought about joining their hellish cult. After calling the police, I went around and recorded video of the DJ playing music, the fireworks going off, and the abundance of drinking and even some minor drug use that I doubt Karen actively encouraged. Then I read up a bit. I got to see Karen's shocked face in the blue light of the siren as I introduced myself to the police officer and began showing him the videos I'd recorded, which each of them I already had the county regulations for noise and public drinking. The county even had a fireworks ban in place. Karen and a few kids too young and drunk to scatter at the siren lights were all that was left by the time I had given my statement. Karen came to her senses though and tried to vanish partway through my statement, but there was a cop keeping an eye on her that didn't appreciate that. When she was brought to the cops to give her statement, she was yelling at all the poor kids that were close to vomiting in the shrubbery. It was a really weak attempt to claim that she'd been present to try to close down the party. At least that does a little bit to reveal some claim to sanity that she was still holding on to. For all her screaming and hollering, I had video evidence with her in some of the shots and her son was not gonna lie to the cops for her. Once the police told her that if she continued to tell lies that could be definitely proven as such, then she would have an added charge of filing false police reports too. Now, the party as a whole was something that would have resulted in quite a few consequences for Karen, but there was more in store for her. She had been insistent that her son bring the most people he could out to the party, and she was not the most specific or careful at this point. Frustration at my consistent rejections had frustrated her. Some of the people that had to be brought into a cell to sleep off the alcohol were minors, and since Karen had provided some of the alcohol for the party, she was liable for them getting their hands on it. Law enforcement didn't even need me to press charges, as the fines for this were more than enough for me to make my point. It should be quite obvious that such horrible charges on Karen's record meant that she was quickly shuffled out of the HOA power structure. It would become difficult for her to stay in the area, with multiple of the underage kids that got their hands on alcohol being children of families in the neighborhood. So she didn't. She moved away later, but the humiliation had made her time in the neighborhood hard for a while before that. And no, I don't sympathize with this woman because I hurt her reputation and record. By the way, her husband made enough money to make her fines nothing more than drops in the bucket, and she was living comfortably wherever she moved. She honestly didn't have it hard enough. I'm still not a part of the HOA and will likely avoid it like the plague from now for this property and any other property I might look to rent or purchase. I do keep up with my neighbors though, as I enjoy the neighborhood. I just don't enjoy appointing other homeowners with no qualifications to tell me everything I can and cannot do to decorate for Christmas. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed the HOA stories, please don't forget to leave me a comment and like the video if you want to support me. The next one is a petty revenge story and it is titled "Constantly Complaining About the Younger Generation Not Working? See what happens when we actually stop working." So my parents and grandparents may be a generation apart, but they still share the same boomer mindset. My older sister, my brother and I now finance their lives. My grandparents are retired, my dad is also retired because he seriously injured his leg while doing physical work and now has permanent damage that makes it very difficult for him to walk. And my mother was a housewife, even though she passed the housework on to us when we reached a certain age, because we were young and healthy and should lend a hand. We basically got caught up in a strange family dynamic where we didn't move out but still did pretty much all the work. We were told that family takes care of each other, but the three of us knew that it couldn't stay that way. 2 months ago, they started bad-mouthing our generation. They said that we were lazy, useless, didn't work, and were the worst generation ever. Their words, not mine. We are all Gen Z, by the way, and we were all there when they said it, and my sister was particularly pissed off. Afterwards, she suggested that if they thought so little of us after everything we do for them, we might as well go on strike and leave them to deal with all the crap. So one morning we started. We stopped paying the bills, found our own apartments, and only did housework for ourselves before we moved out. My parents protested, and my grandparents called, outraged because the monthly money we transferred to them for the bills didn't come anymore. We told them that if our generation is so useless, they certainly don't need our money. Maybe that was a little petty, but we don't put up with that kind of thing. In the end, they called us in a panic because their social security payments were barely enough to pay the bills. My mother was overwhelmed with the sudden housework she didn't have to do for years now, and my father had high blood pressure due to the sudden stress, and they have since apologized. Actually, all of them except my dad, who was too proud to apologize, I guess. Of course, we didn't hate them and now help them out from time to time, but I hope they learned their lesson. And the next one is another revenge story, and this one is titled The Friend Who Lied About His Entire Career. Posted by user The Larkham on r/RipeStories, our own subreddit, where you can post long-form stories and there's a good chance that I will read them in a video. So this one starts like this. In my mid-20s, after leaving the military, I was a bit lost. I'd just been made redundant from a tech job thanks to the recession and had picked up a role at a well-known UK supermarket to keep the bills paid. Because of my background, I ended up as the duty first aider. I didn't have much experience outside the military, but one day I attended a medical emergency at work where, with a lot of luck and adrenaline, I helped save a woman's life. And that is when I met Walter. Walter introduced himself as a paramedic volunteering as a community first responder. He came across as experienced, confident, and someone who genuinely wanted to help, and I admired that. Before long, he encouraged me to volunteer with the service too, and I did. Walter and I became friends quickly. After training sessions, we would grab a pint at the pub, and soon enough he was at my house, meeting my girlfriend, now wife. Over the next few years we grew close, holidays together, nights out, family gatherings. He even stood as a groomsman at my wedding, and through it all, Walter's career seemed to skyrocket. From paramedic to emergency care practitioner, then a cardiology practitioner, and finally working on his PhD in cardiology. We never really questioned it, none of us were clinical, and his confidence told the story. He even did practice exams on me and my brother, checking pulse, blood pressure, listening to our hearts, supposedly for his research. Once when my brother ran out of medication, Walter somehow got a hold of a couple of days' worth to tide him over. It was odd, but we trusted him. He was family to us. Things only began to shift when another friend, Bob, came into the picture. Bob was an old friend of my wife's, and he and Walter hit it off instantly. They even became housemates. At first it felt great, one big friend group, but after a trip abroad tension grew. Walter started pushing us away and eventually the contact just stopped. We were hurt but figured maybe he needed space. Then Bob showed up at our door. His sister, a nurse, had emailed Walter asking for a second opinion on their mom's scans. Walter replied like he knew what he was talking about, but something about his email signatures set alarm bells ringing. She checked, double-checked, and then uncovered the truth. Walter was never a paramedic, never an ECP, never a cardiology practitioner, and never working on a PhD. He had been a volunteer first aider, just like me. His actual job, something in electronic patient records. Suddenly everything fell apart. We were contacted for interviews, asked about what Walter had said, done or prescribed. The lies were deeper than we had realized. And just like that, it all clicked. The exams, the medication, the secrecy, even why he had suddenly cut us off. His stories were starting to unravel. Before anyone could act, Walter quit his job and disappeared. The investigation fizzled out and it, like the whole thing, was swept under the carpet. He blocked us everywhere. Someone collected evidence though and sent it to his boss, but last I heard he had managed to talk his way out of that too. Sometimes I miss my friend. But then I remind myself I never really knew who he was, and if that's the case, then he was never really my friend at all. And yeah guys, I think if you're friends with someone, you should be honest with them. If you have something like a double life or whatever, you cannot really be friends with someone. By the way, speaking of double life, the new season of Dexter, called Dexter Resurrection, is absolutely amazing because I guess some of you might know that Dexter is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and Resurrection is absolutely amazing. I hope they make many seasons of that one. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I live in a condominium community where everybody has their own driveway area. The HOA decided that due to people illegally parking in the driveways or guest spots and then going across the street to a shopping center was out of control. They decided a new system was needed to stop this, and the solution would be to give everybody a pass to hang in their car window. Alone, that is not a big deal because I know that places where you have assigned spot use that method to make sure everything is fine. What I didn't understand first of all was the reasoning they had made zero sense. Nobody was having issues with strangers taking the spots as the lot across from us was huge and always had space for its customers. The only people walking from the condos to the shopping center were people who already lived here. The second major issue was that because of this now they were implementing the guest passes, and after 10 a week it was gonna cost money. I found it stupid that we were now basically limited to having guests come over. Finally, they were only giving one pass per household. So if you had more than one car, you would now have to pay for another residential pass even though the driveways were big enough to fit 2 cars. It was a horrible system as a whole, but I had a bigger issue with it than almost anybody else. I travel for work a lot, to the point that I can even tell you if I'm at home or in hotels more often. It can be tiresome, and one reason that I got a condo instead of a house that would need more maintenance. I was in China for 2 months on business, and while I was there, that was when they decided to implement these new rules. I obviously didn't drive to China, so my car was parked in the driveway. The only time it wasn't there was when my friend would drive it about once a week mainly, so the battery didn't just die from not being used, or I think the battery at least, please don't roast me if I'm wrong, I don't know much about cars. The HOA were all local people who knew me and knew very well that it was my car, and that I was gone for months at a time and would always tell my neighbors. A really sweet older couple that would pick up my mail for me and store it until I got back. They also had my number for emergencies, which is what happened one day. Due to the time difference, I got woken up by a phone call in the middle of the night by the wife. She was freaking out and telling me that she went to get my mail and there was a boot on my car tire. I couldn't do a thing about it from where I was and told her to just let me know if anything changed. Mainly if it got towed away, if she could catch the company name. It did not end up getting towed, but by the time I came back about 2.5 weeks later, I found that a second boot was put on my car, along with the entire windshield being littered with notes about illegal parking. A stack of them being fines from the HOA, with the most recent one being on the top. They were claiming that I owed them $1,000 in parking fee violations. Not to mention the cost to get the boots removed from the car. Keep in mind that this entire time I was parked in my own private driveway and I had no idea about the new mandate or needing to get a parking pass since I was on the other side of the world. I went to speak to the HOA, but they didn't seem to give a single damn. They even admitted to knowing that I was out of the country, but claimed that it was no excuse. They did have the legal right to implement the parking passes, don't get me wrong. However, I felt like it was totally unfair that they were abusing the system to fine me with a ton of money. I was not gonna pay them a cent for what they did to my car or pay to get the boot removed. I set up a meeting with the HOA president and decided that if they were gonna screw with me, I was not gonna mess around. What came out of my mouth to them might have made me seem like a little bit of a Karen, but I didn't care. I was in the right and I knew it. HOA president, the boots will remain on the car until the fees are paid for. You did not have a parking pass on the car. Me, because I was away on business, which you were well aware of. I have no issue getting my pass and putting it in my car, but I'm not paying you anything for having my own car parked in my own driveway. I pay for everything on time and I have a right to park there. HOA president, if you look in the bylaws, me, yes, it shows you have the right to make us use the passes, but if you don't remove the fines and get those damn boots off my car, I'm going to the local news and telling them what you did. Then I'm going to the police to tell them that you basically stole my car and you are holding it hostage. The talk of the news and police scared the HOA president. HOA guy, we don't need to make a huge deal out of it now. We can just get your pass and call the whole thing a misunderstanding. I knew it wasn't because they did it on purpose, and I can tell you exactly why. They saw an opportunity to use my car to make a point to everybody else to show that they had to follow the rules or they would end up with their car booted and $1,000 in the hole to the HOA. They wanted to show that they had power. If the HOA was a worse one, then I could have easily ended up in court and having to make a big deal about the entire thing instead of them just rolling over. The boots were removed in the end and the fines were waived. Plus now, instead of being feared or whatever they were going for, they were now being hated. Everybody knew what they had done and taken advantage of me for not being there. They were officially labeled as having no care or compassion for the people they were supposed to be serving. Before this, nobody really had a problem with them. They shot themselves in the foot. I want to end this story with a question that has been going through my mind since the beginning of all of this. Should an HOA be allowed to have this kind of power? To boot a car and make it so the owner cannot do anything about it? This was about 6 months ago and I still have pictures of the fines and car if I choose to go to the news about it. Part of me wants to see how people online react first and if I made a bigger deal of it than I should have. Or if they do need to get blasted for what they did to me, I worry about other people living here and if the HOA will do something even crazier next time. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm curious, if you would have been in OP's situation, what would you have done? Would you have blasted the HOA wherever you could? To basically ruin their reputation forever? Let us know what you would have done in the comments. The next one is titled Rental Property Drama. After posting my HOA board gutting story, I figured it was time to share another story that happened only a few months ago and shows that some good can come from HOAs that don't have power-drunk buffoons running them. During my tenure, I've seen all sorts of weird appeals and issues that we had to resolve, from pond management problems to neighborly disputes. The issue is, this story however centers around a specific renter in our neighborhood along with their terrible management company. Main story: at the end of every quarterly meeting that we have for the community, members have a chance to stay back and review issues with the board case by case. Typically, this consists of community members who have fines that want to appeal or settle. This time, however, a regular attendee came in which surprised all of us. She had never once had a fine, helped with some committees, and had 2 amazing kids, one of which was special needs, important later. She sat down and calmly set down a folder in front of us, and that is when I knew she was serious. Then she began to explain how she needed help from the board with an issue with her neighbor. She described in painful detail about how her neighbor had been digging up and taking her flowers and kept flipping around the basketball hoop that her special needs son used regularly. She had even installed a camera and had video evidence proof, which she showed to us. Immediately, I became concerned and told her to call the police immediately. She looked down and informed us that she had, and the police told her to go through the HOA first. While that still made no sense to me, I said that we could look into how we could help. She thanked us with teary eyes and left after that. I walked out of the meeting, scratching my head on how I could help without even really knowing what I could do. When I got home, I looked up the address of the neighbor that was bothering her to discover that the house belonged to a renter and property owner that had a long history of issues with the HOA. While I'm not really allowed to discuss specifics here, let's just say that the property has had 10 tenants in 7 years and still has some serious outstanding issues with the board. I looked up the property company and discovered that they owned over 50 houses across multiple towns in my area and had a D- rating with the BBB. I contacted my other board members and asked their opinion on the situation while providing them with the findings of my research. One of them reminded me that the management company had sent a representative to the meeting prior and tried to appeal a whole host of fines with the excuse that they simply didn't want to pay them. I'd honestly forgotten that was the same house, not to mention they also tried to claim that since their tenants didn't want to pay, neither should show the property company. We denied all of their requests since they were years behind in many fees and dues. I drove by the property and realized how bad it looked. The grass was over a foot high, there were dog chains in the front, and their flowers were of course immaculate, and the neighboring houses were missing. I saw the basketball hoop flipped around for myself and couldn't help but let my jaw drop. I couldn't imagine how that lady felt for the atrocities that she had to deal with having neighbors like that. I took some pictures and drove back. On to my revenge, I contacted the board's legal consult and asked if there was anything that we could do to help, since the property ownership company had refused to pay dues and fines for over 8 years since buying the house. We did have the authority to foreclose and then put the house for sale through the bank that had the loan, which I thought was a little strange that corporate housing company would mortgage it given the amount of houses that they owned, but oh well. I did not like the idea of foreclosing just yet, so I set up a meeting request with the tenant. I sent a request for him to talk to the landowner since we were not allowed to interact with renters, and made my list of items. When the next meeting rolled around, the same representative from the company that showed up a few meetings ago was there. He stayed around, and when it was time for his individual time slot, he sat down and calmly asked what was wrong. My VP started with the list of fines and past due payments and asked if/when they planned to pay it. He replied calmly that they had no intention of paying them. I then asked him if he knew that means the company could lose the house to foreclosure. He looked sheepish for a second and then replied with that they had great lawyers since they had dealt with this through other neighborhoods. We tried to reason with him a bit more, but it was clear that they thought that they were above the community standards and owed us nothing. I personally like to wait 10 years before finally deciding to foreclose on a delinquent house, since no account has ever had that long of a history with their HOA, as we are usually able to resolve the issue. HOAs need to use that authority extremely carefully. But since this was clearly never gonna be resolved, the board voted to start the proceedings to foreclose on the property. I reached out to the other HOAs where the company held property and found out 2 of them were doing the same thing. While it's currently an ongoing case, there's a chance that we can also file a class action lawsuit against the company for property negligence. We'll see what happens, but I would love to run them out of business, since all they do is get bad renters, ruin houses, and ignore HOA rules. I also got into contact with our community police contact and informed him of the flower stealing and trespassing, and he was stunned to hear that the department had turned this lady away and offered to help. She reached out to me a few days ago to let me know that there is now an investigation into the matter and that she is trying to sue him for stealing property. I offered to testify if it ever came to that, and I'm sure that she will win. Moral of the story: be nice to your neighbors, and property ownership companies are terrible for communities. Update to the story: 9 months ago I posted about a rental property that was out of control due to a poor investment property firm. After a long legal battle, the board was able to prove to a property judge that the land was out of control and was not maintained. We secured a lien of 20% of the home for all of the fines and unpaid violations, and the judge ordered them to be paid immediately. Otherwise, they would face an expedited foreclosure, since the property owner was acting in bad faith, and my state has a special process for these edge cases. As of yesterday, the company who owned the property declared themselves insolvent, since 3 other surrounding HOAs imposing similar fines on their properties were included in the ruling. We cannot wait to recoup the damages, and we are working our local foreclosure management team to try to help guide the process in selecting a new homeowner, since any party 15% stake gets weird voting rights. We are really hoping for a tenant that wants to take care of them and wants to avoid another investment company with a poor record of house maintenance. As for the poor homeowner whose flowers were stolen, well, the board paid for the new neighborhood's landscaper to professionally install them after the current renter left a few months ago. The homeowner's property looks awesome, and they have recently joined our social committee to welcome new people to the neighborhood. While I have to keep it very vague, there are also criminal charges being investigated, which will unfortunately take more time to process. While not every story has a happy ending, the diligent work of this homeowner saved the community and others from a terrible homeowner. Always document these issues, since you never know how someone else may help you with it. And now let's read another petty revenge story. This one is titled "Revenge is a dish best served stinky." So I once ate something that did not agree with me, and my entire digestive system protested by cursing me with horrible farts. My noxious emissions smelled like a corpse smothered in rotting garbage juice and dirty diapers, festering in a den of skunks. It was really that bad. Went to the gas station to get some ginger ale to possibly settle my stomach a bit and prevent the wife from filing for divorce, calling an exorcist, or maybe even both. She would probably have a solid case for attempted murder at this point. So this old lady was being a Karen because she forgot her ID and they would not sell her a fifth of vodka. I thought I was gonna be in that line forever until I felt the pressure coming on. This was my chance. I let one slip out, and it was the longest, warmest, silent fart I've ever let out. It was so foul, I swear the paint on the walls changed colors, just like the cashier's face. I'd never seen that shade of green on a human before. I said, "Lady, you're obviously already drunk off your face anyways. Pretty sure you just crapped your pants. It would be illegal to serve you anything." She protested angrily, turning like 3 different shades of red. The cashier retched like a cat hawking up a giant hairball, and with tears in his eyes yelled at her to get out. She tried denying it, but nobody believed it was not her. She stormed out, seething with rage and nausea. I felt like a stinky superhero that day. And yeah guys, thanks for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.